Welcome, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Pfarrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this episode of Indications and Warnings on July 15, 2025. It is day 1,238 of Putin's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck, in just the past few days, we've seen Donald Trump meet with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, right in the Oval Office of the White House. And in the course of that meeting, make some announcements that give supporters of Ukraine real hope. Now, I found Trump's performance a little confusing. Maybe you can help us analyze it and understand it.
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit of disentanglement and disambification, as we used to say. We got to make this, because the president made some pronouncements, but he did not use the exact military language that would make it sort of understandable and quantifiable. And Jason Smart and I did kind of a meet the press right after we did a live take on it. The president, for example, said that he's going to send Ukraine everything it needs, which is a little hard to quantify because it needs everything.
Right.
He said he's going to send them 17 Patriot somethings. He later said, including batteries, which makes it sound like some sort of toy you buy.
Yep.
However, the headline is it's $10 billion worth of military aid. And Alan, you and I have talked for quite a long time about what is likely to happen when the president finally realized that he was being played for a mug by Mr. Putin. And as you predicted, he is a vindictive man. And he hasn't gone full vindicator yet, but Putin is in a bit of trouble here. We'll talk about how the war is going for Putin in a little bit, but $10 billion worth of military aid, prominently featuring air defense situations, that equipment that Ukraine needs desperately, and also the fact that by this time, as we speak, these arms are being shipped into Ukraine. We're going to see in a matter of weeks, I think, a real inflection of the war situation here.
Well, there was a lot of misdirection in Trump's performance in the Oval Office with Mark Rutte, I thought, and there were no details, and this is the problem. A lot of wait and see. Now a couple of days have gone by. There were reports, of course, of Trump's phone call with Zelensky, where Trump asked Zelensky, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St. Petersburg? Well, yes, they can with their drones. They've already done that. That wasn't the kind of strike Trump was thinking about. And Zelensky's answer was the appropriate one. Yes, if you give us the weapons. Well, today, Trump is asked, are you considering long-range weapons for Ukraine? And that would specifically be ATACMS. So ATACMS were mentioned as probably going to Ukraine again. But when Trump said he wasn't considering long-range weapons in a press interview on the South Lawn today, your head begins to spin. So what is Trump going to send through Europe to Ukraine? I don't think anyone really knows.
I don't think anyone really knows either, but I do think this. The only thing the president was able to do during the press conference was deftly avoid naming brand name weapons that Russia will object to. I have some reports indicating that 21 ATACMS missiles will be sent to Ukraine. That seems likely to me. Again, that's unverified. And again, folks, the HIMARS missile, if you have a HIMARS missile launcher, it'll launch 6 rockets, guided rockets, or 2 ATACMS. They're a much bigger caliber. They're a much thicker, bigger weapon. Looks vaguely like a German V2 rocket, and these are precision strike weapons. But again, it's interesting that the president would ask, are you going to hit Moscow or St. Petersburg? I don't think he reads the papers. Maybe Millennia does, but of course they have hit Moscow, and of course they have hit targets in St. Petersburg. And I'd also like to add, in no way do the Ukrainians address targets in Moscow or St. Petersburg in the same manner or with the same purpose that Russia does. They don't kill people. They don't kill civilians in either Moscow or St. Petersburg. They attack targets of strategic military importance. And in the cases where they have struck buildings in Ukraine, in Moscow, as we both know, they have targeted offices of the FSB.
Yep.
That is their specific target. They're not out to kill Russian civilians. It's utterly counterproductive. And frankly, look, we're the good guys. We don't like that. And finally, even President Trump realized, you're saying one thing on the phone to me, Vladimir, during the day, but during the night, you are killing Ukrainian civilians. And I heard an alarming thing, Alan. I'll wind this up. Mr. Trump intimated that Ukraine is concealing the number of civilian dead in these Russian attacks. And that chilled me. I was accepting their numbers at face value. I thought, look, you've got a well-developed civil defense and shelter system, but it may be that these attacks on cities are killing more civilians than we know.
I don't think they are, Chuck. I really don't.
Well, you've been there. You've been there.
I was going to say, from the people I've talked to in Kyiv, and from some of the sites I visited in Kyiv, and including the Children's Cancer Hospital right in the center of Kyiv. And there is a neighborhood in Kyiv that's been especially hard hit. It seems to be repeatedly targeted. It's a dense neighborhood with high rises and what have you. But I don't think that the Russian attacks are killing more civilians than Ukraine reports. This has already been the most deadly summer for Ukrainian civilians. I think this is, when Trump said that, and I watched the whole Oval Office thing, it's just Trump's imagination getting the better of him, I think. I really do.
Well, he certainly does misspeak. It was alarming to me to hear that. But your experience on the ground is, that is definitely to be taken. You've been there. You've taken the pulse of the population, and it is remarkable that Ukraine has kept the casualties down. But again, in Kyiv, you're dealing with this Soviet-designed city, and the subways in the Soviet Union are hundreds of feet below ground. They were literally designed as the subway system in Washington, D.C., designed to survive a thermonuclear strike.
Yeah.
So,
well, the subway station at DuPont Circle could survive that strike, but there are plenty of others that wouldn't.
Oh, well, I don't know. In Arlington, you go down and down and down and down.
Yeah. And some of the subway stations in Kyiv are deep, but some of the subway stations really aren't. They're all used as shelters, and they provide safety to thousands upon thousands of Kyiv residents when Russia launches these massive attacks. And we're going to talk a little bit about what those attacks have looked like in just the last few days. But the other thing that struck me, of course, was Trump's threat to impose 100% tariffs on Russia if there was no peace agreement in 50 days. And that didn't sit well with me because I believe that's giving Putin 50 days to continue to kill Ukrainian civilians and to try to push his summer offensive as far forward as he possibly can.
Yeah, and I just want everyone to think of this phrase. You have a kid doing something you don't like, and you say, I'll give you 50 days to knock that off. Okay. So we could also just briefly take apart the president's threats to impose 100% tariffs. Okay, first of all, the United States only does $3 billion a year of trade with Russia. And of that, 60% is fertilizer and inorganic chemicals. And the rest, there are a dozen 2% things. So to put that $3 billion trade in context, Russia does about $480 billion trade worldwide, and most of that is its oil and gas. So again, the president didn't exactly clarify, is this 100% tariffs on Russia or is it 100% tariffs on consumers of Russian hydrocarbons and energy? I mean, we don't know.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that this war is going to end when Vladimir Putin is no longer able to wage it, either because he's dead under a 10-story balcony or he no longer has the tool, the implement, the Russian military to prosecute his war aims. And 50 days from now, let's say 3 weeks from now, 21 days from now, we'll start to see some change in the complexion of this war due to the arrival of these American arms through NATO. 50 days. Look, the war's not going to be over in 50 days, folks. I promise you. It's not going to be over this Christmas, and it's not going to be over next Christmas. But the cost of doing business for Russia, that has to go up, Alan.
It does. And again, I mean, this is part of the problem of conducting foreign policy in the mind of a single person, Donald Trump. That is pretty much American foreign policy. Whatever he says on any given day, even though it's the reverse of what he said the day before, this creates a problem not only for the United States, but for our allies. And I suppose in an odd way, it creates a problem for our adversaries as well, because they don't know what the hell Donald Trump is or isn't going to do. But he used the word tariffs, didn't use the word sanctions. They're different things. A tariff is an import tax, of course, and a sanction is a penalty that can be imposed on individuals, on banks, on industries, or on countries doing business with Russia. And this is the point of Lindsey Graham's and Richard Blumenthal's Russia sanctions bill. It has 85 co-sponsors in the Senate. So after Trump was finished meeting with Mark Rutte, John Thune, the Republican majority leader in the Senate, went to the White House for a meeting and emerged saying, you know, we're not going to bring this sanctions bill to the floor of the Senate for action because the president doesn't feel he needs it at this time. I was very disappointed to hear that.
I was as well, because every impediment possible should be put in the path of Russia. And economically, look, that is the head of the snake, is the Russian economy. But to get, we've got this vacillation and ambiguity in what the president said, what he means, what's going to get sent. Here from 100,000 feet, here's what's important to me. The increase of Ukraine's ability to have a functioning nationwide air defense network that uses the apex predators of the Patriot system and the less, I don't want to say less capable, because some of these other systems like the NASMs, like the Iris-T, like the Croatel, look, they are lethal, but
Yeah.
they have a different range parameters and engagement parameters. Once Ukraine can and declare sovereignty over its skies, including over the zero line, you're going to see some big improvements, some big benefits for Ukraine. And as Alan knows, one of those big benefits is going to be securing Ukraine's ground lines of communication and
Yeah.
supply, meaning getting beans, band-aids, and bullets to the front. But here's the other thing that has been important. Alan and I have talked about this a lot. No responsible Ukrainian commander can even postulate an offensive operation, sustained offensive operation, looking over his shoulder and wondering when he's going to run out of stuff, wondering when the U.S. is going to pull the plug, or even more despicably, Marco Rubio, when they're going to unilaterally blind Ukraine by pulling the plug
Yeah.
on their intelligence.
Yeah.
So does this $10 billion bill, influx, does it answer all those questions? No. But we're starting maybe to approach a situation where Ukrainian commanders could possibly hope to go on the offensive. Should they do it right now, this summer? To me, no.
Yeah.
Let the Russians keep showing up and keep killing them.
Right.
But that's that's how changeable, crazy, foggy this situation is.
Yeah. And we don't know what's on the grocery list, so to speak. We don't know what Ukraine has requested, or what the NATO countries think that they want to buy and deliver to Ukraine. Norway and Sweden joined in today, saying that they would be among the buyers of American weaponry for Ukraine. It's interesting. The other part of the context that surrounds this development, and it is a development. I mean, it's you've got to say there is reason to be hopeful. It's good for Ukraine, especially if there are the follow-up actions that we anticipate. But so in Washington, there was Mark Rutte, also Boris Pistorius, the defense minister for Germany, meeting specifically with Pete Hegseth. In Kyiv, there's General Kellogg. So what is interesting to me is that all these contacts are defense and arms oriented. General Kellogg, I don't think is in Kyiv talking about peace. I think he's in Kyiv talking about the weapons you most need. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And, General Kellogg is a very capable man operating on the strategic level. But you know what? He's a military guy, and he's there for nuts and bolts. I mean, I am gratified that the United States has done this. Like you, Alan, I am incredibly frustrated.
Yeah.
I was disappointed for 4 years under the Biden administration. I have been disappointed thus far under the Trump administration. But to pat ourselves on the back, you and I both saw this coming. I personally thought it would take 4 weeks. I'm happy to remind everybody I was wrong. It took 7 months.
Yeah.
But it's finally happened. But again, getting whipsawed by Washington is now a national sport.
It sure is. I just hope we don't get into the situation of, yes, we have no bananas today. General Zelensky said, you've got 170,000 Hellfire missiles. We could use some of those in Ukraine, and you're going to dispose of them anyway. It wasn't a weapon system that Trump mentioned, of course.
Right, and folks, to just show you how crazy this is. So you've got a Hellfire missile sitting there in its crate. It has a shelf life. It's a bit like cottage cheese. Look, it's great when it's fresh, but it isn't just a question of, okay, these aren't any good anymore, you're going to throw them away. No, no. They've got to be disassembled.
Yeah.
You've got to, it costs money. It's much more easy and cheaper to ship them to Ukraine. Well, they'll dispose of them by squirting them into the hatch of a T-90 tank. And what was the number, Alan? It was what?
I thought there was 170,000. I could be
Yeah,
wrong about that. And then, some of them are out of date, but so what? How many days
yeah.
do you let your milk go before you want
Eh,
it?
Well, exactly. And I would also say this, I have never seen a Hellfire missile miss
Okay.
personally. They do miss, but I've never seen one miss. And here's the other thing. Russia doesn't have 170,000 more tanks.
No.
Okay, they don't. Ergo, I don't know, I was a psychology major, but I think we can all do the math.
Yeah, I think we can. And it's to put a final point on just the context of all these various meetings, moving parts. Uh, President Zelensky is reorganizing his government. It appears that the now former defense minister of Ukraine, Umarov, will be named ambassador to the United States, which strikes me as a pretty cagey appointment by Zelensky because he's appointing a former defense minister to be ambassador in the country of his most valuable ally and the one that really can supply most of what Ukraine needs militarily. So he talks the language, in other words.
Absolutely. And it also shows the sending General Kellogg as an envoy, it frames the problem in a military context.
Yeah.
Now, to give this important diplomatic post to the Minister of Defense, look, it frames the context. And Alan and I have had some offstage episodes, let's call them. I have always learned from my Ukrainian friends that when you talk to them about some other project, they say, we want weapons. You can say, I've got this other project. No, they have dollars and they are for weapons. That's what they need. And I'll hand it to them. They don't need a lot of tactical advice. I don't think either.
No, I don't think
they need
they do
the
either.
tools.
Yeah, they need the tools, which is why, in a way, I think this 50-day window that Trump proposed before he would impose tariffs or sanctions or whatever he was going to do to hurt the Russian economy. You can let that 50-day window kind of drift into the background as long as weapons are getting to Ukraine at the very same time. Also, for operational security, I think American advisors, and I know NATO advisors, as well as Boris Pistorius himself from Germany, have said we are not going to be announcing what weapons are being purchased and delivered to Ukraine. And I think that is wise because I was always suspicious of the Biden administration basically using the presidential drawdown authority for public relations.
Well, they did. And the other thing, there was a considerable gap between what they announced, what they shipped, and what arrived. And those are three separate categories. Some things would get shipped and weren't delivered, and other things were announced and weren't shipped.
Right.
But I will say this. So how are we going to quantify what effect this $10 billion has? Everybody get out your calendar right now. Just write this down in your yellow sticky notes on your Mac. 50 days from now, we can expect, at the median burn rate that Russia is showing, 50,000 Russian casualties in the next 50 days. Let's see how that number differs, because I'm making the incredible prediction that Russian casualty rates are going to go up. Not immediately, not maybe even in 3 weeks, but they will go up as the air defense takes root, as Ukraine is able to project more air power, as its ground lines of communication and supply are secured, and the uptick in the precision strike weapons that Ukraine is able to bring to bear on Russian force postures. So that number, Alan, I'm going to guess it could quintuple by the end of the year.
Yep.
I expect it at least to double in the next 50 days. So at the end of that 50-day window, instead of 1,000 Russian troops a day, we could be looking at 2,000.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, Chuck, because I think you're right. I think these next 50 days will be very intense. Probably you are going to see more than 200 attacks a day launched by the Russians all along the zero line. And I just want to, so people can get this information on their own. You don't have to wait for Chuck and me to come in from fishing to deliver it. But if you go to Ragnar Gudmondsson's dashboard every single day, and it's posted very early in the day, he has added some really helpful, easy to use visualizations. One of them shows you a heat map of the zero line. Where are most of the attacks occurring? Another gives you a look at this war since Russia invaded Ukraine. The very first thing that will strike you in 2025, casualties, killed and wounded of Russians, is at its highest level ever on a consistent basis. So the average every day is 1,000 or more. And I think you're right, Chuck. We haven't seen those 2,000 number days recently. But I think because of what the Russians are about to attempt in Ukraine, we'll be seeing more than 2,000 killed and wounded day. And you can find it at Ragnar's dashboard.
Right. And an increase from 1,000 to 2,000, there is a number of factors that influence that. The number and magnitude of Russian attacks, and the math remains the same, 35 to 85% casualties at every point of contact. Again, the ineptitude, the wastefulness, the bungled resource management of Russian generals is going to come into play. And it gets worse, right? You bungle a platoon-sized attack, you've lost 30 guys. You bungle a battalion-sized attack, a la Vuhledar, a la Kupiansk, you lose 1,000 guys in that one location. And you go up to 100,000 feet just for a second here. If you want to know how the war is going, folks, since January of 2024, the Russians have lost. They have lost 1,000 people a day, every day in that period, and they have conquered 0.25, 1/4% of the landmass of Ukraine. They are advancing at a rate that will take them 180 years to conquer Ukraine. And at their most active places on the front, they are moving forward at the same rate as the Battle of the Somme in World War I, which was a bloody, horrendous, human-killing stalemate. So, and this is without the $10 billion worth of arms.
Right.
So we'll see.
We will see. And do take a look at Ragnar's dashboard. Another thing will just jump right out at you, and is the loss of Russian tanks and armored vehicles, APVs. It's at its lowest ever in the course of the war, because Russia is no longer using them in assaults on the zero line. They are using unarmored vehicles to move their soldiers forward, or they're putting their soldiers on motorcycles. But the kill rate of unarmored vehicles has soared.
Right. And, you see these Mad Max contraptions, these metal boxes. They put a tank in there and they heap every bit of scrap metal they possibly can to get on it. I want everyone to know how cynical that is. You can't see very much out of a tank anyway. An M1 Abrams, at least you've got wraparound video coverage, etc. But when you take a T-62 tank. That's right, 62, as in President Kennedy. And then you put it in this metal box. You can't even bring the main gun to bear. So it is this suicide box that creeps forward on the battlefield. Its speed is constrained, its maneuverability is constrained. It's just this stuff is never going to work.
No.
And it isn't working. And we talk about 1,000 Russian soldiers. Look, that's 2 battalions of dead day in, day out. To put this mildly, we have seen the 155th Brigade of Naval Infantry has been wiped out at least twice in its entirety. The Guards Airborne Division that was fighting in Kherson, trying to take the village, the village of Ivanesky, I believe, that was just upriver. They were fought to a standstill by 500 Ukrainian soldiers. And to wipe out a division, the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, the most people it ever lost in a day in its history was when a plane crashed carrying 200 paratroopers. They have never lost 200 people in a day throughout all of World War II. So we're looking at the mismanagement, the mistraining, the misapplication. 500 people should not be able to fight a division of your paratroopers to it, not just to a standstill, but to wipe them out.
Right. Well, that is a fine example of bad command. It has to be.
It has to be. You know what? You put a guy through airborne training, you give him a rifle, you train him, he should be a better soldier than that. But if he is badly led, badly supplied with bad morale, that's it. Yeah. You can have an F-14. If you don't have Goose and Maverick, it's nothing. Right. It's nothing.
Well, we mentioned, of course, General Kellogg is in Kyiv. The skies over Kyiv have been relatively quiet since he's been there. I think Russia hesitates in launching one of its most massive attacks on Kyiv while there is such a high-level American official there. But I think also, and this was a week ago, so July 7th, during one of the most massive attacks Russia had launched at Kyiv, there was an intercept rate of almost 97%. So you can't say that Ukraine has broken Russia's aerial assault. It hasn't broken Russia's terror attack in the skies, but it sure has blunted it.
Yeah, and so on this particular night, there were 623 incoming threats, which included 25 cruise or ballistic missiles, 319 shaheeds, and 258 decoys. And, it's a little bit of a firing victory here because you've got, look, this is incredible. 96.7 is as close to, a sky shield as anyone is ever going to get. But again, everything that went through was aimed at an apartment building.
Yeah.
And it killed civilians. The other thing is about this, the absolute utility of this victory. You're expending hundreds of surface-to-air missiles. Some of these incoming threats were brought down by electronic warfare, but you're engaging 623 incoming targets. Chances are you fired 1,000 kinetic, surface-to-air missiles, possibly hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of rounds of anti-aircraft artillery. This is why Russia keeps doing it, to kill civilians and to deplete, drain, and negate Ukrainian air defenses, to stress the system.
Which is why those Patriot batteries and all kinds of other air defense systems are so important to Ukraine. They have been since the time the war started. and right before getting to maps, and the maps tonight are very important. So I want everyone to stay with us. But this would be a perfect opportunity to talk very briefly about Skynex, which is basically the anti-aircraft system manufactured by Rheinmetall. It's a German defense manufacturer, and now I believe Rheinmetall and Ukrainian partners are manufacturing Skynex units together. It is a pretty competent air defense system. It reminds me of the anti-aircraft systems that you would see in the Second World War.
Yeah, it is kind of on steroids, but definitely the idea, the overarching idea of it is there. The way to imagine Skynex is imagine you got a cylinder that looks like a can of soda, and there's a turret on top of it. The genius of Rheinmetall, and look, if you like Porsches, you're going to like Skynex. You can have one of these systems. You can mount it in a armored vehicle so it can move around. But you can also, and this is the way that they sell them, you just buy the turret and you sit the turret up. And just like your router in your house, you set one next to the other, they communicate with each other. They can share sensor inputs. You put 3 or 4 or 5 of them around an airfield, you turn on the Psycho Kitty switch, and they independently will sense, target, and triangulate their fire on incoming fires. And if you've seen one of these things go off, it sounds like, and what you see in the air is a line like something from Star Trek.
Yeah.
And that is every 5th bullet has a tracer on it. Okay, now as these bullets approach the target, they read the reflected radar signals. As long as they're getting close for HTK, hit to kill, they will just wait and smash into the target. But the minute the intercept math goes off, they detonate. So these things, they slice up Shaheds. They just destroy them.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we see this high number of Shahed kills every night is AAA, anti-aircraft artillery, of which Skynex is, look, that's the Cadillac gear right there. And they need more.
And they do need more. And Skynex absolutely shred Shaheds. I mean, you put up that debris field, basically, and Shaheds cannot get through it. Very similar, obviously, different millimeter size for frontline soldiers, but very similar to the fragmentation munitions that frontline Ukrainian soldiers are now being supplied with. A couple of magazines that they can use in any standard issue weapon on the front line, specifically fragmentation munitions designed to shoot down drones. And it's going to make a difference to soldiers' safety on the front line.
Yeah, absolutely. So, every soldier now is going to carry one of his magazines will be filled with, let's say he's firing an M4 platform. You got a 5.56 millimeter shell. A regular 5.56 millimeter bullet flies faster than the speed of sound, but when it hits you, it's all in one piece. What these new frangible rounds do is they come out of the barrel and they start to disassemble themselves. So instead of punching a hole in something that is literally 0.2 of an inch, right? Maybe it's 1.5 feet wide. It's exactly, you can't say it's exactly like a shotgun, but it puts a pattern out. And again, this is the brains of Ukraine. A bullet spins, that's why it's called a rifle. The bullet spins, and their material science is such that as this thing travels and rotates about its longitudinal axis, it expands the projectile. So again, fascinating. And I would also say there's no ammunition like that I know in the American military, at least not that I have seen. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a great step forward.
Yeah. Well, just to bring this first part of the program to a close, simply to emphasize, it is quite possible that because of Trump's decision and eagerness to get defensive weapons to Ukraine as quickly as possible, including Patriot systems, but various other kinds of defensive systems, and with the development of interceptor drones. Ukraine has made that a priority with the increased manufacture and deployment of the Skynex systems. Uh, Maybe by the time we get to September, Chuck, maybe we will see Ukraine for the first time in this war with sufficient air defense, both to protect civilians in its cities and to cover the soldiers on the front line. You think that's a possibility?
Absolutely, it is. And Ukraine, their national command echelon has to make those very tough determinations. They are not adequately protecting the soldiers on the zero line. The protection of Ukrainian civilian life has been prioritized. A tough call, right? But who do you want dying, your soldiers or your civilians? So we could see a sea change in this. Some of the numbers that are kicked around, incoming Patriot systems may now approach 17. Is that enough? Well, I'd like to see 36, but is 17 good? You're damn right it is. So some of these systems, like the Gepard, for example, which should be at the front, we're going to see it, I think.
Yeah.
And again, this is, the time increment here is 2 weeks. So a fortnight. Look for the changes to happen, 2 weeks down the line. Like I said, 21 days is a good point for you and I to revisit this. And again, folks, hold us to that.
Yeah.
Projecting 50 days from now, 50,000 Russian casualties. Let's see how it deviates from that. I think at least one standard deviation. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, you've put me on that problem. I'm going to watch that every single day. No question about it. So this is how important the maps are that we're going to look at tonight. Roughly 200 attacks a day along the zero line, a third of those in Pokrovsk, but more than half of them uh, coming between Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk. And that is why we are going to look first, Chuck, at your large scale theater of operations map from July 12. You can see all the way from Chasiv Yar to Pokrovsk on that map, or if you want a landmark in the north from Kramatorsk and at the very top of the map to Pokrovsk at the south southwest. Ukraine is really being hard pressed in this theater.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are looking, as Ellen said, at the larger scale, and we will visit Pokrovsk itself and have some things to talk about here. Some areas you can see that just southwest of Chasiv Yar is Kostianvinka, a much bigger city. You can see that chunk there south of the H-32 that Ukraine is desperately trying to hold on to, and the Russians, of course, would like to close that and redraw the zero line along the H-32 highway, which, of course, would not only threaten Kostianvinka, but in fact start to occupy it. As Alan said, this is the focal point. Well, let's change it. One of the focal points of Russian military effort, and don't they want it? So again, as we get into Pokrovsk, we'll talk about the particulars of that. Russia is squandering its resources, and we talked about to say that it's advancing at the speed of the Battle of the Somme, and I know many of our viewers are not, they're not military historians. The Somme is synonymous with attacks that were futile, and whoever attacked died in their thousands, and in fact in their tens of thousands. And it was the epitome of military ineptitude. When you talk about the Somme, it was the tactics of the old world of massed fire and cavalry coming up against machine guns. We are at that similar inflection point in terms of military tactics that Russia, with its 1980s battle plan, is up against the first 21st century force in Ukraine. And Russia is paying these staggering costs for minimal gain. And again, remember, I did the math. Actually, AI helped me do the math. At this rate of advance, it's going to take Russia almost 2 centuries to capture Ukraine, 180 years. Okay, so, in the meantime, I'm not really worried how many Vatniks die. Okay, I don't care. I worry about how many Ukrainian soldiers have to die.
Yeah.
But in this case, Alan, if you attack, you are paying the penalty.
Yeah.
And Russia has been doing it for the whole war.
It was a couple of weeks ago that General Syrskyi, the overall commander of the Ukrainian military, announced Russia had succeeded in reinforcing around Pokrovsk with 111,000 troops. And when you look at this theater-wide map, Chuck, it seems to me that maybe Russia is aiming to enlarge this salient that lies between Pokrovsk and Toretsk. If they're able to do that, it threatens both Pokrovsk and Toretsk, as well as Kostyantynivka.
Yeah, this is really what they want. And well, and let's put the 111,000 troops into perspective. You've got 111,000 bayonets. They're not all in the fight. It takes at least 4 guys to put 1 guy into combat. So we're looking right away at, 25,000 bayonets, not 110. And that will last Russia about 25 days.
Yeah.
Now, they will eventually push everybody forward. And to our Russian listening guests, if you are a Russian soldier assigned to the Pokrovsk effort, you're not going home, pal. You're not. You're doomed. Your doom light is illuminated. You are never getting out of this. But again, the wasting of that manpower, that material, the equipment of those soldiers, and to take one more thing, you're looking at the big portion of this map. So I want you to look at Kostyantynivka, and I want you to look at Pokrovsk as well. If both of those cities fall simultaneously, Ukraine is not going to crumple. We have seen this before. We've seen it again and again. Russia lost at least 50,000 dead taking Bakhmut, which, as we always said, was the gateway to Chasiv Yar. If they take Kostyantynivka, they will still have Chasiv Yar in their rear. They can't move farther. And if they take Pokrovsk, and we'll go down and do a real down and dirty looking at that. If they take Pokrovsk, again, it isn't going to, it's not the end. And Omar Bradley would not have wasted his time on these two cities. And if he had 110,000 men, he would use them differently in maneuver warfare. But again, Alan, you and I have talked about this. I am of the opinion Russia does not have the kind of commanders who could fight the kind of war that could win the battle in Ukraine. I just don't think they can do it anymore.
Well, let's zero in on Pokrovsk. I mean, this Pokrovsk and Toretsk, really are the centerpieces of that large scale operational map. Uh, Ukraine has launched some successful counterattacks south of Pokrovsk. The Russians are also looking to close in on Pokrovsk from the east. And the other thing I'll mention is that the M30, which runs north to Pokrovsk, right through the heart of Russian positions, it is the main line of supply for the Russians. Ukraine has made that into a road of death.
Yeah, we talk about the forward edge of the battle area, and in my day, that was basically 1 or 2 kilometers away from where the quote zero line is. And I use this example a lot. You don't know where the zero line is. The zero line is when you stick your head up and a bullet snaps by your head. That's the zero line. So that used to be double rifle range. So, we're talking 1,000 meters or so. Now, that forward edge of the battle area is a 40-kilometer strip, 20 kilometers on either side of where I draw these little red lines. Drones of both sides are swarming over that area. And if you put out heat, or you are moving, or you don't have enough bushes covering you, you're dead. And again, the first person drone is the weapon that kills the most soldiers on either side. Alan, I'll let you go into we have some reporting directly from Pokrovsk. I wonder if you would summarize what we've heard, and then I can base these comments on it.
Sure. Francis Farrell is a frontline correspondent, works for the Kyiv Independent, and he was in Pokrovsk less than a week ago, and actually spoke on Ukraine, the latest, which is broadcast 5 days a week. It's a production of the Telegraph newspaper out of London. And he was very gloomy about Ukrainian prospects in Pokrovsk. And I guess that is the best way to summarize his assessment of the situation in Pokrovsk. Is as hard pressed as the Ukrainians are. He said there could be motions towards a withdrawal in 2 or 3 weeks, potentially.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me. But let's look at just how this war is unfolded. So, for example, the Russians losing upwards of 50,000 troops to take Bakhmut. Okay, did that ever make sense? Well, it was a transportation nexus. There were 4, 5, 6 highways that emerged in or around Bakhmut. There was a river. There was a rail junction. Except, so it had all the trappings of a tactical and strategic, military objective. But people would say, well, the Bakhmut has fallen. Well, it took an incredible number of dead to take it, and it didn't debauch anywhere. You had the M03 and the M32 highways. They diverged. It wasn't really that great a military target. So what are we talking about in Pokrovsk? And as Francis said, look, I can see that the situation is not good. And if you are looking at the 14 July map, and again, thank you, Thomas, for putting that up, you can see those big arrows I've put up there. Those are the principal threat vectors that Russia is operating on. You can see they're working to surround Pokrovsk. I've often heard some of our journalistic colleagues saying, look, Pokrovsk is a vital transportation link, et cetera. No, wait a minute. It's at the end of the line. So you see the M30 highway and the M0513. they're not a vital transportation line. They lead to this besieged city, which, by the way, is almost completely destroyed,
Yeah.
like every other place Russia has ever touched. It is almost utterly destroyed. And should Pokrovsk fall, look, it would be important if Russia could capture a transportation nexus that was behind Ukrainian lines. When you capture one that's on the front, you're nipping off the end of the wire. You're not cutting the wire in the middle. So again, could Pokrovsk fall? Look, there is no question about it. Yes, it could. Could this game no longer be worth the candle for Ukraine, forced to manage its limited resources? Yes. And you know what? In the long term, could this happen? Well, I have Bakhmut as an example. I have Severodonetsk as an example. To a lesser extent, Mariupol, which was a different case because it was utterly surrounded.
Mhm.
But not impossible, Alan. Absolutely not impossible.
Well, when you look at Pokrovsk, which is the main city, and it is practically destroyed at the moment, but then you look to the east, to the suburbs of Minorad and Moskovsky. This is a pretty dense urban area that the Russians would have to fight through, and unless, as you say, they succeed in encircling Pokrovsk. Not an easy task for them, but I mean, that is why the back and forth fighting around Kuduri to the west of Pokrovsk has been so important. It's why that little neighborhood south of Pokrovsk in Pashani is so important, because that gives the Russians a view into southern Pokrovsk. But I think if the Russians decide they are going to make a head-on assault, it is going to be terribly costly.
Yeah, and this is another case, when you go back to the 12 July map and you can see the sort of thumb and mitten reaching around Pokrovsk, just exactly as Alan has said, battling through those urban areas is going to be uh, incredibly difficult. And you can see, just as you said, they've done all they could to avoid those two eastern suburbs,
Mhm.
because you go from a one-dimensional plane, operating on just a flat map. And remember, whenever you come into an urban area, the battlefield becomes three-dimensional, right? Not only does it go up into the skyscrapers, all the underground utilities are in play. As we've seen in Gaza, it is an incredibly brutal conflict to fight in urban areas. And again, as Alan pointed out, the Russian effort it was going to take to completely encircle and besiege Pokrovsk, I don't know if they can do it tactically, in terms of leadership, in terms of morale. I just don't know if they can do it.
And just remember Chuck's Russian odometer: 1,000 killed and wounded a day. Quite likely over the next 50 days, we are going to be looking at 2,000 killed and wounded a day, simply because of the the toughness of what Russia has to fight through at the moment. If you look at what their aims are to achieve them, Russians are going to uh, die probably at twice the rate they are dying right now, and that's 1,000 killed and wounded a day.
Right. So, not to put too fine a point on it for a Russian listening guest, when this goes up to 2,000 casualties a day, that equates to more than 600,000 casualties a year. It Look, that's unfathomable. It's incredible. I don't know how long they can keep that up. I truly don't. And I don't just, anyone who says, well, they've got millions of young men to, oh, okay, great. Military age 18 to, let's even push it for Russia, 18 to 60, right? It isn't working. And if you get inducted and 3 days later you're on a Ukrainian battlefield, look, you are not a combatant. I posted a video of a Russian conscript attempting to shoot down a Ukrainian FPV drone. His weapon was on safe.
Okay.
He couldn't have pulling the trigger wouldn't have done anything. That's a function of training. And so all of that matters. And these Russian casualties are going to go up, Alan. There's no question about it. If it goes to 3,000 a day, I don't see how they stay in the war.
And it could reach that number, actually. Again, given what Putin's aims are for his summer offensive and what Russia must invest in terms of killed and wounded to achieve those aims, it could soar above 2,000 a day. It could. I mean, it could right in Pokrovsk. It could right in just up the road in Touretsk. But we're actually going to move to the northeastern end of that big operational map, and we're going to go back to Bakhmut in a way. So we're going to be south of Chasiv Yar, east of Kostyantynivka, and the Russians are suddenly doing something that I wondered why they hadn't attempted, and that is a run down along the H-32, which runs south of Chasiv Yar and right into Kostyantynivka.
This is the 15 July Bakhmut axis. And you can see there is a perennial contact point in the vicinity just south of Chasiv Yar, there at Mykolaiv. But in this case, we're going down the H-32 highway, and we're looking at the little village of Predichene. Now, here is something that Alan and I don't often see, and that is contact plots on the map that seem to indicate a really cogent military objective and the sort of operations I'd expect to see if you really wanted to do something. Now, what do I mean by that? You can see there's 4 battle icons there next to Predichene. This is the way you advance your line. Now, just, rewind and look at some of the other battle maps we just talked to with the contact points widely scattered, numbers of kilometers apart from each other. These attacks around Predichene appeared to be something Russians don't usually do. These appeared to be mutually supporting attacks, meaning the units to my right and left can actually operate with me. We can converge fields of fire. We can cover me. I'm moving forward. That's fire and maneuver and fire and movement. Okay. I plot those 4 contact points and I think, okay, I'm paying attention, but these attacks were rebuffed. So I don't know what the series of attacks were. Were these synchronized in time? Were they not? Did one start at noon? Did one start at 4 in the afternoon? A lot of things have to come together. If you want something to succeed in the military, it's got to be geolocated and contiguous in time, right? These are fundamental things that cadets learn. Russian generals don't seem to learn it. But this was, this was a legit effort, right? Taking Predichene would be important for the Russians. Okay. But once again, look around, and the nearest trees are what? They're around Kostyantynivka. If you're moving through the open in this war, you are paying the toll.
Yeah. If those trees are still standing, I mean, they might have
right.
blasted to sticks. But this attack south of the H-32, much different than the piecemeal attacks we saw the Russians feed into Chasiv Yar, and they really were piecemeal attacks.
Yeah. So again, generally folks, well, they don't even follow their own doctrine, right? Their doctrine is a multivalent attack, at least 3 units. One attacks, one operates in support. Whoever breaks through, the 3rd unit will reinforce them. They don't do it. And there's a lot of reasons why, but one of them I truly think is this. These Russian officers are aware of the abysmal morale of their forces. They don't dare put together a larger operation of any number greater than they can quite literally physically subdue while they're briefing. Is this crazy? Why do I keep seeing attacks with 30 and 40 guys? And when they do attack in larger formations, they have come to grief inevitably. The battles of Uladar 1 and 2, the battle close to the Oskil River in Kupiansk, where they lost 400 guys in 20 minutes, right? There's a big problem here, Alan, and we see it again and again. Look, we've been talking about it for 3 years.
Yeah.
I keep thinking, I got to be wrong. Don't underestimate the enemy, but it keeps happening.
Yeah, it does keep happening. If you can lose 400 guys in 20 minutes, you can certainly lose 2,000 guys in a day. Um, I think it's important to take a look at Kupiansk, and this is your map, Chuck, from July 13, so just a couple of days ago. Why important to look at Kupiansk? Well, there are still a couple of thousand of Ukrainian civilians living in Kupiansk. It is now a city without water, gas, electricity. It has been completely cut off from those everyday supplies that you need as a result of constant Russian shelling and glide bomb attacks. Now, when you're a civilian in a city like Kupiansk, without the means to carry on your everyday life, again, the possibility of additional civilian evacuations is probably going to come up here.
Yeah, this is, in looking at the recent contact reports, I really should have reported on Kupiansk today. Looking at it, and there have been points of Russian advance. But if you look at the H-26 highway, which debouches to the east, you can see the Ukrainians are still holding that big salient going into Russian positions. But what's fascinating to me about the latest contact map, and I'll get this up tonight, actually, there are points of contact that are kilometers inside the Russian lines. So north of the loop in the H-26, there's Ukrainian contact that's 2 kilometers inside. And interestingly, down the H-26, there are 3 points of contact that again are multiple kilometers inside Russian lines. So this tells me a bunch of stuff. It tells me that Ukrainian patrols, raids, probes are able to breach the zero line and strike deep. So that means the front line is permeable. So why is that? So at the very least, it means whoever you have up there on the Russian side, they don't see the enemy coming, they don't sense them, they don't care, or they run away. And all of those are indicative of, morale and combat effectiveness. I mean, half of what the SEALs do, look, we probe in, we go on reconnaissance, we go sneaky peeking. The fact that you've gotten, first of all, the fact that you approach the zero line, you cross the line of contact, you continue to patrol deeper and deeper into Russian territory, then you made contact and extracted, usually with prisoners in tow, beginning to see maybe some telltale signs that things aren't working for the Russians. And I mean, you're there to set security, and at least 4 Ukrainian tactical elements came right over your head and are operating in your rear.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the interesting things about this Kupiansk map. I mean, the other thing I would say is, again, we're in a map where you don't see coordinated Russian effort. You have these attacks to the north of Kupiansk, and that's where most of the attacks have been coming in Kupiansk, as if they have made this decision, we're going to enter this city from the north, but not really coordinated with Russian attacks to the east. And without that coordination, there's no encirclement that the Russians are going to be able to conduct here.
Well, right. And on this map that I'm looking at, there are 8 points of contact, and only 3 of them can be construed as Russian attacks. They are contiguous to the zero line, and in 2 cases, they are slightly advanced, like half a kilometer. The rest of these points of contact are inside Russian lines, right? So these are raids, these are penetrations, these are Ukrainian advances against Russia. Look, like I say, it isn't just, you approach the zero line, you're not detected. You cross the zero line, you're not detected. You are operating in the enemy's rear, you're not detected, and you initiate contact. Look, this is the way I was fought as a SEAL. You don't fight unless you can win, right? You fight when you can win. You initiate contact at your discretion when you can win. That's what this is telling me here. Important, a little indicator. This is indications and warnings. Yeah. This is a little indicator. This is what your army screwing up looks like.
One final map for today's show, and it comes from today, July 15th, brings us back to Kreminna, brings us back to the Russian attempt to find a way into Liman. That is the centerpiece of the Kreminna axis. They pushed this salient out north, quite a ways north of Liman, pushed it west of that little town of Nove. A very back and forth fluid salient that the Russians have created here. Probably very difficult for the Russians to supply their troops in this salient. Does Russia have the opportunity to expand it in a way that will threaten Liman from the north or from the northwest?
I just don't see it, Alan. And they have pushed. Let me look at my scale here. They have pushed quite a ways in. So I'm looking at maybe 10, 12 kilometers, and 10 kilometers is 6 miles for those of us who weren't raised on them. But what Ukraine has done here is you're outnumbered 10-1, and your resources and your force posture and your risk calculations, you've got to let something give. So the Ukrainians have decided to give the most disadvantageous territory as possible to the Russians. So they have let them expand west of the Zarabets River, considerably north of Liman, traversing extremely open and broken terrain. They've got them in a pocket that is from Novi Mi in the north, goes a little south of Nove in the south, and the Russians are pushing just about as far as Vovchi in the west, heading towards the Oskil River. That's not getting them any closer to Liman. And this is another case. You're a general, you're a resource manager, you're expending these resources, you're gaining ground, you report that like a good puppy to the Kremlin. Nobody looks at the map and says that's great, but Liman is not where you're going. So here, and this is actually amazing to me that Ukrainians are still holding on. Point your finger in almost the middle of that map and you see Torsky. That is the key to Liman. If Torsky falls and the Russians pour over there, they could get to Liman, but it hasn't happened, Alan, and I don't think it ever is going to happen.
Yeah, we talked about Torsky the last time we were looking at approaches to Liman. There's nothing special about Torsky that makes it a defensive fortress like Chasivyar on top of a hill. I mean, Torsky is just really a little farm suburb of Liman.
Yeah, and to the south, of course, we have this ever-ending battle, and it's hard to even call it the Serebryansk forestry anymore, folks. It is this hellscape
Mhm.
of twisted, broken trees like giant pickup sticks. And, first of all, operating in the forest is good. There's cover, there's concealment, there's everything you need. It favors smaller units. Whoever is discovered first gets killed, but they have turned this into, it's not a forest anymore. And the best thing to compare it to are the photographs you see from World War I, because in World War II, maneuver warfare, it didn't get that bad, but the forests were blasted apart in World War I. And that's what Serebryansk looks like. And again, the Russians do things to their own detriment. They created this, first of all, you could operate in a forest, but they've created this barrier, this this vegetative soup that no one can pass through. And again, we've been watching these guys, Alan, forever. There's about 10-1 superiority here, and
Yep.
God bless the Ukrainian defenders.
Yeah. Also, a place where the Russians have used chemical warfare, actually in the Serebryansk forest itself, probably continue to in this summer push towards Liman. I think of all the maps we visited today, Chuck, I'd have to say that maybe Liman and Kupiansk are the least threatened, and Kostyantynivka, Toretsk, Pokrovsk are the most threatened by the Russian summer offensive at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a good assessment. And the Russians, again, their center of gravity, just as Alan has said, it's from Chasiv to Pokrovsk. That's what I see. I think that's what they see as their most desirable. But again, Alan, it's one of the reasons why the Russians are not going to win this war. They're willing to put tens, sustain tens of thousands of casualties, quite literally hundreds of thousands of casualties at these very ambiguous objectives, right? To wipe out, 100,000 casualties at least, killed, wounded, missing, everything, to take Bakhmut, and it gained you nothing.
Right.
It gained you nothing. And as long as they fight like that, they're never going to win this war.
And actually, you can see how much of nothing the Russians gained by taking Bakhmut when you simply go back in time through the maps Chuck creates every single week. Go back 2 Augusts ago, and 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 take a look at Chasivyar. What was happening in Chasivyar 2 Augusts ago? It was holding on as the fortress it is. Look, I think the key point for everyone to take away from this show is the point that you made at the very top of the show, Chuck. Uh, the Russian odometer, 21 days. Right now, an average daily killed and wounded number of 1,000, a little bit more than 1,000. A very strong possibility that it could double 21 days from now because Ukraine is going to be receiving key weapons, key defensive weapons that actually will make an offensive difference to them right on the zero line.
Yeah, it will. And, here we are in high summer, the dog days. But it's good to remember that at the end of August, the weather's going to change. And 6 months from now, as these $10 billion worth of weapons arrive in Ukraine, Ukraine's ability to attack Russian ground lines of communication will increase at the worst possible time for the Vatniks, right? You can go a couple days in the summer without any food. First of all, you can go a long time without any food, without any shelter, without resupply. But in the winter, you'll be dead in 24 hours, right? The climate will kill you. That's coming up. None of this bodes well for Russia. None of it. So there's only two ways out of this. Putin ceases the war because he ceases to live, or he no longer has an army that can attempt his imperial ambitions. And to me, Alan, the best solution is destroy the Russian army in Ukraine for the peace and security of Ukraine, but also, let's face it, for the peace and security of Europe. So that blessed day is going to come. I'm still a long war guy. I have to be, but we'll have to see. Let's check out our 50-day number and see what's happened.
And those milestones you mentioned, Chuck, are really important. 21 days from now, let's take a look at the daily casualty rate of the Russians, because over the next 60 days, as Putin told Trump, he intends his summer offensive to succeed. And for Putin to be satisfied, he needs to reach the aims of totally occupying Luhansk, totally occupying Donetsk. He does not actually occupy both those oblasts 100%. He wants to move into Zaporizhia Oblast, and there are still these rumors of a cross-Dnipro operation by the Russians in a dash for Odessa. The most unimaginable fantasy of a military plan I think I've heard in the course of this war, that the Russians could make a dash for Odessa now.
You know what? Bring it on. To our Russian listening guests, I think that's a great idea. Put your supply lines across the Dnipro on whatever expedient bridges you could throw up. Then you have to cross the Bug River. Then you have to cross two more rivers. So good luck getting to Odessa. And in fact, to try that, Alan, might actually be the fatal blow for the Russian army.
Yeah.
It might truly be the last thing they ever try.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's hard to even credit those reports.
Yeah.
And folks, again, just get a map of Ukraine, find Kherson, and move your finger west. You'll see Mykolaiv, you'll see the Bug River, you're going to see three more significant rivers before you get to Odessa. Nothing could be more incredibly stupid. And even the history of World War II shows us how desperate fighting is in that area.
Yeah. So that's the key from July 15th here on Indications and Warnings. Watch Chuck's Russian odometer, the daily rate of killed and wounded. A lot of those casualties are going to come around Pokrovsk. A lot of those casualties are going to come around Chasivyar, Kostyantynivka. A lot of those casualties will be coming around Toretsk. But I think there really is a likelihood that we'll be seeing some of those 2,000 plus days of killed and Russian wounded. Until then, Chuck, I do want to say Slava Ukraini.
And Heroim Slava. And folks, Alan left me holding the bag tonight, so I'm the guy who has to say, hey, look, we are battling principalities and powers. We don't know how the algorithm works. We don't get pushed to the top of the heap. But look, if you can, share us, like us, donate to the wonderful charities that Alan has selected. We're not asking you for any money, but just, hey, give us a like, tell some friends, and please help us spread the word. And thanks so much for sharing some time with us. Alan, as always, it's been a pleasure.
And we'll be together again just a few days later this week. Thanks, Chuck.
Good night, everybody.